So I'm excited to do the deep dive, and I am a former swimmer, so it's not going to be the diving board kind of dive. It'll be like the speed dive kind. We're trying to get a good start on your laps. I am very excited to have both Carlos Evans and Kathryn Bazan here with me, and I am going to defer parts of this presentation to them because they've had a very important role in pushing action around environmental justice in Dallas. So you've seen this one before. The challenge with all those photos, with the exception of the one on the bottom right, is they're primarily in communities of color. This is from the 4th National Climate Assessment. Unfortunately, it holds worldwide, and it holds in Dallas as it does back in 2018. It still holds for the 5th National Climate Assessment. Those communities that have the least means to address climate change in their community are the ones that will be impacted the most. And so that includes communities of color, elders, children, lower income communities, and combinations thereof. And so this was really our cry when we were pulling together that original plan. This was the slide that we kept going back to are we doing something where we are addressing those folks that don't have the means to address it on their own. So we've been through the bases. Again, I'm very proud because we went to like 100 different zip codes to make sure that we had community input. One of the other things that we did is the first 2 meetings that the city called, and this is kind of like what the Reverend was saying. We had some meetings. The first one, a whopping 2 people showed up. And so our friends from Sunrise Movement told us that our social media sucked and that we really needed to do better. And so we worked with them and did do better, but we also realized that it's not people coming to us. It's us going to communities where they're at and talking at football games, at churches, wherever. The other thing that we understood is there are some communities in Dallas that really aren't excited about doing anything around something that's promoted or introduced by the government. We called it the ICE effect. And so at the time, we had some college students and some high school students that were jumping at the bit, trying to do something to help with climate. And so we did a meeting in a box, and we sent forth those students to hold meetings in safe places in their community. And so we were able to get input into the plan that way, so that the conversations happened in a safe place. We're going to hurt our feelings, and we weren't going to come down on anybody if they told us we weren't doing very well. But we understood that conversation can be hard. We understand that all our residents are legal citizens. Don't care. They're still residents, and they're still a part of the community. Went through this part already, went through that part. This is one of the more critical pieces of our plan, and it's kind of tucked away in the front. And that is, as we were screening those 400 actions to get to 97, we went through a specific screening process for every single one of the final actions to ensure that we looked at whether and how an action specifically would benefit or burden vulnerable communities. And then we looked at ways of making sure that those community members had access to the things that we're proposing as a part of this plan. That was critical. The U.S. Green Building Council called us out as the first city in Texas that actively addressed equity as a part of their climate plan. And I'm proud of that. Austin came along later and did a climate equity plan. It's basically their community plan doing what we did. And that's great. It should be done. But that analysis took a lot of time, and it is one of the things that is guiding us moving forward As we look at solar, well, gosh, we got to do something. Not everybody has $15,000 to $20,000 sitting around where they can plop some panels on their house. How do we make this work? Again, that's where the mother lode of information is. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. We had an original environmental task force that was used to build a commission. We had a lot of those original task force members. I think Michael, you may have been one of those. I know Renee was. That were on that task force to help develop the framework for the commission. We were formally created by an ordinance that was unanimously adopted by the city council. And the makeup itself, I think, is critically important too. We had some long debates on this. We wanted to make sure that the community had a voice in implementation and that all of the community has a voice in implementation. But we also wanted to make sure that the actions in the plan had the technical background as we're implementing as well. And so we did a council-appointed commission of 15 voting members, one from every single council district in the city plus the mayor. And then we had a technical panel, and with one for each section, and basically an expert on each section of the CCAP. So Michael's like our energy person. Yay! And we have a guy from the Builders Association that's the building one, and we've got a farmer, we've got the executive director for the Nature Conservancy is our green space person now. So we, I think, have a great mix of both people that are very familiar with the community and those folks that also know the CCAP, know the technical parts. One of the other things that came up and this was in our outreach to the community, is that back in 2005, we had an environmental health commission. Well, the environmental health actions went to Dallas County, and so the city doesn't really do much directly in environmental health anymore. We also weren't really excited about having two different environmental commissions with potentially different advice going to council. And so we set up a standing committee of health experts. And we've got some pulmonologists, can't talk, some children's health experts, some nurses. I think Renee's on that committee, as is Candace. And so they have done a lot of heavy digging into some of the technical issues that we've looked at relative to air quality and human health in particular. As we got going, though, we realized we need more committees. And Renee and Esther, who was here yesterday from Council District 6, and Temecula DeRoe, who's with District 7, had been independently advocating for their community for a long time to get environmental action around batch plants, around inappropriate industrial land use. Well, those three ladies got together as a part of this commission and started pushing hard and formed an environmental justice committee to really focus on some of those issues. I can't say enough about the work that the Environmental Commission has done, because they're doing the digging in and finding the research and making recommendations to the commission that then subsequently go to council. And with that, I may turn this over to Kathryn Bazan, and she will probably be much more eloquent than I.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kathryn Bazan, and it's my pleasure to join you this afternoon to talk about environmental justice and the Environmental Commission and its work. So as Susan mentioned, the Environmental Commission was formed. We began meeting in December of 2021. And our mission is really to be the conduit between the council. We are to advise the city council and the community. And so what we do is we bring information out to the community about the things that the city is working on and or proposing, and we bring things to the city from the community, concerns, questions, issues, problematic land uses, and incompatible adjacency in our neighborhoods. Our priorities are largely a combination of both things that are delegated from the city council, things that the mayor has identified as his annual priorities, and then things that the council committee has asked us to consider and bring back a recommendation on, and then things that our commissioners bring back from their districts. So our commissioners are deeply connected within their council districts. They're out and they're meeting with community and they're engaging their community members and they're having discussions and they're listening and they're participating and they're trying to better understand how is it that we can collaboratively work together and solve some of these issues, because what is happening in Council District 8 is often also happening in Council District 7. It may not be happening in one of the northern districts, but a lot of our commissioners bring back these same issues, and when we come up with a solution, oftentimes it is a good fit for some of the other issues that are being experienced by other residents in our communities. And that's not to say that every community's need is not different. It certainly is, and we consider that as well. I'm going to let Sue talk about the racial equity plan, but I do want to just kind of give a little bit of context into why it is sort of in 2023 that we see these issues that we continue to have as a community. And you have to go back into history and understand the history of redlining and what redlining was. And it was the very intentional placement of incompatible land uses and undesirable land uses near communities of color and marginalized communities. And as a city, as a municipality, as a local government, it has taken decades to undo the damage that has been done. And so as community members, what we can do is, advocate for those changes at the policy level. That is what we need. That is what ultimately the city needs to hear from community members. And as the faith community and as members of a white community, the very best thing that you can do is listen to what a Black or brown community or a marginalized community is expressing that they need or want or desire. It is never the role of a white community member to go in and say, I know what you need. Or, I've heard some things and I'm gonna go and talk to my policymaker friend and I'm gonna solve this for you. That's, we refer to that as sort of the white savior complex, right? We can't have that. And so it is crucially important that, as the Reverend said, we're using our voice, our resources, and our advocacy to listen to what it is that those community members need and advocate and amplify that. And I would urge you all, if you're not familiar, to review the HEMES principles of community organizing, because one of the principles that I think is probably the most important is they organize from the bottom up and listen and amplify what it is that that community is asking for. So I'm going to turn it back over to Susan. That's my 2 cents, and I might jump back in as needed here. So.
You may be back, and or Carlos may be diving in. So one of the projects where the Environmental Commission was very helpful is the city started probably 4 or 5 years ago a racial equity plan. The whole focus was on basically undoing the red line, and that is admirable. It's important work. The city developed some equity indicators using the Government Alliance on Racial Equity guidance. That said, though, that guidance is heavily focused around social demographics and social science. When you look at the equity score, and our department, we're working in the environment. We're working in environmental justice daily. But we scored horribly on the equity indicators on our budgeting for equity because we weren't doing any of the social stuff. We were doing environmental justice. So when you look at those equities, they're the closest we come is neighborhood, but then the subheadings under that were things like childhood hunger, which, yes, childhood hunger is critically important, and it is peripheral to the work that we're doing in our office, but it isn't necessarily an environmental indicator, it's a health indicator. So when they started reviewing the draft, they presented to the commission. And the commission asked that question. There's like, something's missing here. What are y'all doing about environmental justice? And they're like, ooh, environmental justice, that's not one of our indicators from GARE. That's going to be data that we don't have. So we've been working to help them, and this is where Carlos' background in doing work on environmental justice at EPA has been helpful. The map on the left-hand side is a tool that he helped to develop while he was at EPA. It's called EJ Screen, and it is mapping of the toxics release inventory, hazardous waste facilities, all permitted air and water discharges that have pollution against different communities. And you can pull up economic demographics and underlay that. You can pull up racial demographics, but it gives you a pretty good handle of where the nasty stuff is versus where our people are and where our people of color are. So we started looking at that, and we've done some recent work trying to bring more information on batch plants to the community's notice and providing support in the hearing process. The last 3 batch plants that we chased down were on city projects, which is really embarrassing. And it's one of those things, the engineers were doing great work. They were bringing infrastructure in places that needed infrastructure, but they weren't thinking about the impacts of that construction on the neighborhood where the project was. And so we started doing that, and we realized, we need a tool to help those engineers understand better what impacts they've got on their community from this construction, from these projects. And maybe if there's 20 batch plants already, we don't have the contractor build another one. And that's kind of what the practice was. West Dallas has 20, I think South Dallas has 8? And each area also has a Superfund site in proximity to residential homes, churches, schools, parks. And so that's a problem. This is in development. I'm really excited about it. We're taking Dallas data in addition to the EPA data so that it's a local data set. We're also looking at GIS data on where we have opportunities for community gardens and food production, where we have opportunities to reduce our heat island impacts, and then we're in conversations with the local hospital district to get health outcomes, because I think that cross correlation between health outcomes and where we've got folks with asthma and where we've got pollutants is going to be extremely telling. All this data will be available to all of our residents, well, maybe on the residents. We haven't gotten there yet. Is it going to be available to the residents? It's definitely going to be available internally. We're working with our planning department on an update to the comprehensive land use plan. This is the first time they've looked at environmental issues as a part of that planning effort. So it's a huge first step to bringing awareness so that we can thank you. So anyway, batch plant efforts. This is our friends in the Environmental Commission chasing these down, chasing down the permits with TCEQ, supporting the neighborhoods to call for a hearing. We actually changed our development code. Typically, the way it works in Texas, the state can give a person a permit for a batch plant. That's done. They can go build it. They don't necessarily coordinate with the local community at all. And so we found a loophole in the state regs where we can, as a city, require that hearing locally so that the neighbors know what's going on and can let the state agency know what those concerns are. We are currently working on a phase 2 of those regulations to provide buffers, to provide distance, to provide some analyses of multiple sources in the same community. That we're still having to look at. The state legislature kind of slowed us down a little bit there, and we're not sure what we can do yet. but it's still on our to-do list. Last but not least, this is probably one of the most impactful projects we're doing. It started out with the Texas Nature Conservancy. We're now working under an EPA EJ grant and also an ARPA grant to install community-level air quality monitors in the neighborhoods where we do have some of these inappropriate sources. I think this is going to be really helpful to understanding the impacts from those results, and I think it will support better planning moving forward. And that's all I've got, unless you've got questions.